Fasten your seatbelts for the realest Eagles and Sixers YouTuber! One who plays no clickbait and gets to the point! The myth, the legend, Nicky Steves! Come to my channel, you know the deal. Yo, boy, always keeps things real. I'm simply statue, think, and slate, dropping unrealistic mad 2K takes for the clip. Even though cats like that get views closer to the milli, never hear me preach, look on to Philly. Before you watch the Eagles all the way through the early 22, authentic talk, forget what others do. Come to my channel, you know the deal. Yo, boy, always keeps things real. The 24/7, 365 way. Sports content for the reals to fill the day. Good afternoon, folks. It is noon Eastern Standard Time. And as you can see, it is Thanksgiving week, folks. So with that being said, without any further ado, let's get on into it. It's episode 36 of the 3-Point Blitz. We're here. We are live at the new time. And you guys know what the drill is. You guys know we're doing this live always on my channel and the Hardcore Sports Network as always. And we got the links into it both in the chat this to go around. And we're also doing this on the Hardcore Sports Network Facebook page. So shout out to Mitch for letting me use their page as well. And in just a few moments, we're going to dive right into it and get started with the 3-Point Blitz tradition of the rant of the week. Now, this time around, you guys might be thinking I'm going to rant about the Philadelphia Eagles, or I'm going to go off about Kevin Patullo or some of that. Nah, actually not. I'm going to go a different route. There's a certain player, while retired, he's a pretty influential player still to this day, particularly in the NFL world, because he's continuously got himself into trouble. And that is one Adrian Peterson, the former Minnesota Viking, New Orleans Saint, Arizona Cardinal, Washington Commander, Seattle Seahawk, Detroit Lion. That Adrian Peterson got arrested on a DUI again. And it's a shame. And we're going to talk about that because now this is not the first time Adrian Peterson has been arrested before, because apparently this was in late October. He was found asleep in SUV before the arrest. So now this is his second time he's been arrested for driving while intoxicated. Apparently this happened around Halloween weekend. He was around 9 a.m. on Sunday morning that weekend. He was found asleep at his vehicle near a gas station. Now, fortunately, he was pulled over when he did fall asleep, but it was clearly obvious that he was obviously intoxicated, and he had driven the car too and pulled over. And when police pulled over, he appeared visibly intoxicated, like he was not sure where he was at. Supposedly, he left a poker game, and in the time since, they've interviewed a few of the people at the poker game. They said he was drinking heavily. He would sometimes leave the game, go to his car to get some more money. Whether or not he was actually getting money or had some alcohol hidden in his car, that part I not looked into. But the bottom line is this: Adrian Peterson was visibly intoxicated. He did attempt to drive. Fortunately, he was pulled over on the side of the road before he fell asleep. But he still got behind the wheel of the car and attempted to drive. And this is the second time this calendar year, more specifically the second time in a 7-month stretch, that Adrian Peterson has been arrested for DUI, which is mind-boggling. And quite frankly, it's sickening at this point, because this is a clear example of negligence on the behalf of Adrian Peterson, that to get not just once, but twice get pulled over for drinking and then driving while intoxicated or under the influence. Second alcohol-related arrest for driving while intoxicated, and in less than a year. That's complete negligence right there on Adrian Peterson's behalf. You already got busted for driving under the influence earlier. DUI, DWI, whichever one it is. You got arrested for it earlier this year. And then you have the audacity to attempt to drive while you're intoxicated. Mind you, Adrian Peterson is a full-grown adult. He's played a full NFL career. Should be old enough to know whether you're intoxicated or not, to know, okay, if I'm intoxicated, I should not get behind the wheel of a car and drive. You have to mention, as Adrian Peterson, you already got arrested earlier this year for the same thing. What good did Adrian Peterson think was going to come out of trying it again after you already got arrested for this earlier this year? So he got arrested back in April, got drunk, decided to drive, got busted. He decides late October, Halloween weekend, to try the exact same thing. And it was so horribly that even Adrian Peterson, who tried it, had to pull over to the side of the road, ended up falling asleep on the side of the road. Fortunately, he was parked when he fell asleep, but still, ultimately, he tried it again, which is stupid in and of itself. And the reason, folks, I have such low tolerance for this, because driving while intoxicated or driving under the influence of alcohol, or both in some cases, can have serious consequences. It could lead to somebody getting injured, physically disabled for the rest of their life, could sometimes lead to someone getting killed. And we've heard countless news stories where someone goes out, gets intoxicated, tries to drive, they end up running a pedestrian over due to their reckless driving, or they cause a crash, which ends up killing someone. See what happened with Henry Ruggs. You remember when Henry Ruggs decided to get intoxicated, driving at ridiculously alarming speed, he ended up hitting another vehicle, the car caught on fire, and unfortunately, the woman in the car died a gruesome death. So this can happen before, and it's happened specifically with NFL players, and that's why Henry Ruggs is now in a jail cell instead of the NFL. So this can have serious consequences, including potentially death or permanently being disabled. Someone could get in a serious accident, be confined to a wheelchair, have to live the rest of their life with one foot because of this, because of negligent people who decide to drive under the influence of alcohol, knowing they're incapable of driving. And Adrian Peterson, he's been caught twice doing this. Who knows how many times Adrian Peterson has actually got behind the wheel of a car while intoxicated. Because usually when you get arrested, it's not your first time driving under the influence. It's your first time getting caught by law enforcement and facing some sort of punishment for it. So this is one of those issues that's very serious that I don't think people don't talk about enough. People, especially when it comes to sports figures, we're more caught up in how they conduct themselves in the locker room or how they conduct themselves in interviews with the media, more so than we are how do they conduct themselves? How do these guys that are role models that young people look up to, how do they conduct themselves off the field? Do they know how to drink and be responsible adults doing so? Are they faithful fathers? Or do they have multiple children by different baby mamas? Or possibly in some cases, multiple children by different baby daddies for female athletes. But we don't think about these things. We don't think about as much about domestic violence unless it's a hot subject and we're trying to chime in on it. And that's another issue with Adrian Peterson as well. But we're still on that subject. So here's a guy in Adrian Peterson who, despite being, on the field standpoint alone, an easy Hall of Fame running back. Here's a guy who off the field has been involved in child abuse, domestic violence, and multiple drinking and driving arrests. Obviously, Adrian Peterson, what he was on the field during his peak with the Minnesota Vikings, he's been the exact opposite in terms of being a role model off the field. Matter of fact, I would say Adrian Peterson is not a role model at all. It's really about time, those of us, if we're talking about athletes to look up to be consider ourselves role models after, there were some players who are excellent at their sport, but not role models. And Adrian Peterson is one of them. Great player on the field, but not a role model at all off the field. Like I said, I'm going to reiterate, child abuse, domestic violence, multiple drinking and driving arrests. So, yeah, you got Adrian Peterson, as Mitch said, Adrian Peterson used to be my favorite player when he was in his prime. So you get guys like that who were great players at their peak, such as Adrian Peterson. But the more time goes along, you realize your sports heroes aren't always the people you want to look up to outside the sports world. If you're looking for examples of someone to look up to while I'm on that subject, Dikembe Mutombo. I remember me and Mitch talked about this last year on the Pick and Roll podcast after his passings. Rest in peace, Dikembe Mutombo. We talked about the good he did outside of basketball, giving back to third world countries, introducing a Basketball Without Borders program, building a hospital. Dikembe Mutombo used some of his money to give back to help try to make the world a better place. Damian Lillard, even somewhat, has been a figure who's given back to the streets a little, well, for lack of a better term, but he's given back to his hometown. He's been humble and embrace of his upbringing and tried to give back to some degree. Like that, if you're looking for role models, those are guys. Or for football-wise, well, you're still here, Mitch. Here's a perfect example. A Philadelphia Eagle, Chris Long, would be a perfect example of an excellent player on the field that you could look up to off the field. Now, Chris Long was only with the Eagles for 2 seasons, but throughout his career, he pretty much played for free that 2017 season, the year of Super Bowl 52, because he donated most of his checks to help with homelessness. So he did that, and he's also started the Water Boys program to help give affordable water to underprivileged or to people that lack good resources to try to make sure that they have access to water. So Chris Long maybe wasn't the greatest defensive player of all time, but he was a great role model off the field as well. Real humble person, didn't let all the money and fame get to his head. He never thought of himself as better than people just because his dad was a great defensive player for the Raiders back in the 70s. He thought of himself, he was always very humble about being Howie Long's son. And when he did make some money of his own as an NFL player, he gave back. He used it to he wants to make sure that people that lack water have it. Try to help combat the houselessness problem in this world. Those are examples of role models. Unfortunately, as much as some of us love the Adrian Peterson, the player, based on his behavior off the field, he's not a good role model like a Chris Long or a Dikembe Mutombo. And that's, unfortunately, the downside that comes with being fans of some of these players. So for Adrian Peterson, and the last thing I'm going to say about this, the last thing, I understand that Adrian Peterson's post-football, that's not an excuse for his lack of direction in his life. I understand he's entering weird territory in his life where the one thing he was used to is no longer relevant, but that's not an excuse for getting behind the wheel of a car while intoxicated. If you're going to get drunk, come on, Adrian Peterson. You've made millions of dollars. At least I'm sure Adrian Peterson can arrange for transportation with millions of dollars in his bank account. So that's not an excuse for this type of reckless behavior, especially if you're rich and famous like an Adrian Peterson, or kind of going off the grid here, Jeff Hardy. You shouldn't be getting behind the wheel while intoxicated. I'm sure guys like that have enough money to make arrangements for transportation from a sober driver. So make smarter choices. Don't be the fool that tries to get behind the wheel of a car, because you never know if that might cause someone's death or cause permanent injury. So do better than that. Adrian Peterson, a Hall of Famer, but his behavior in recent years, not role model worthy. So with that being said, that's all I'm going to say there. I feel it's something we got to bring up. Now it's time to switch gears. We're going to do what we usually do on the 3-Point Blitz. We're going to talk about the NFL. This time we're recapping Week 12. Let's get this thing rolling. Let's talk about Thursday night, shall we? The Houston Texans beat the Buffalo Bills 23-19. In this game, now the Houston Texans, I got to say this, though, before we trash the Buffalo Bills. I do want to at least give Houston Texans some credit. The Houston Texans have an extremely underrated defense. Let's face it. And you saw in this game, they had 8 sacks over the Buffalo Bills. Now, that in part has to do with their offensive line hasn't been that great. But we got to be honest, the Houston Texans have an underrated defense. I think they're leading the pack for least yards allowed in the NFL, and that's played a key role in them being where they're at now, sitting at 5-5 and still alive in the playoff mix. Now, is it a long shot the Texans actually do make the playoffs? Oh, it's a long shot. I don't think it's going to happen. Even though they are still alive, I don't see the Houston Texans making the playoffs, especially without CJ Stroud. Now, to be fair, Davis Mills did have a good game here. He had 2 passing touchdowns. He didn't throw any picks, and he didn't have any turnovers. So Davis Mills had himself a respectable game. I'll give him that. But when it comes to Davis Mills being a starter for an extended period of time, even with CJ Stroud not playing to the standard of his rookie season back in 2023, Davis Mills is not, even that CJ Stroud's still the better option than Davis Mills. So with that being said, though, I will give Davis Mills credit. He had one good game, but this is also against the Buffalo Bills secondary that's been struggling for weeks. And it's not just this game. Even the game against Tampa Bay, they can thank Josh Allen for bailing them out with 6 total touchdowns in that game against the Buccaneers last week in Week 11. That played a huge role in them winning that game. But then you go back to Week 10 against the Miami Dolphins. Their secondary was terrible, and they got cooked by the Miami Dolphins offense. And now here they gave up 23 and 2 touchdowns to Davis Mills, who during his time as a starter before CJ Stroud took over struggled as a starter. This is starting to see a huge red flag about the Buffalo Bills secondary. Unfortunately, though, Josh Allen can't carry this team from a week-to-week basis. And you're starting to see in recent weeks the pressure of having to carry this Buffalo Bills offense, who doesn't have a true weapon. Their best weapon is Dalton Knecht, the tight end, but he's really, even then, with all due respect to Dalton, he's not a true, we don't think of him as a true top-tier weapon. And who else does? Josh Allen's best weapon for his entire career has been Stephon Diggs during his tenure with the Bills. And now you see this year, that lack of true weapon is starting to catch up to Josh Allen. And you clearly saw it in this game. He's trying to carry this team. And this Houston Texans defense, who's pretty underrated, mind you, took advantage of the mismatch. And they had 8 sacks, and they feasted on that weakened Buffalo Bills offense. So we got to also give credit to the Houston Texans. Like I said, they have a pretty underrated defense. And I don't think people realize just how good this defense is. Because if you look at the schedule here, look at the Texans game by games. Because the Texans do have themselves a pretty solid defense that a lot of people don't think about. Against against the Broncos, they held them to only 18. Against the 49ers in October, they held them to just 15 points. So the Houston Texans, even week 1 not week 1, what was it? It was week 3, they held the Jaguars to just 17 points. Opening week, they held the Los Angeles Rams, who've had a phenomenal season on offense, to under 20 points. So the Houston Texans defense has been the strong point of this team all year long, and a lot of people forget that. So I think the Buffalo Bills, really only having Josh Allen carry the way, got overzealous, looked past the Texans, and underestimated their defense. So I'll give credit to the Houston Texans defense for holding it down and getting the upset win, keeping the Texans season alive. But I don't see the Texans making the playoffs, though. But moving right along now, this ended up being one of the most important games of the week. That was the Kansas City Chiefs over the Indianapolis Colts. The result of this game, with Kansas City winning in overtime, was huge for the AFC. The playoff picture, it helped push New England to first place in the AFC as of now. The hoodie's back. Matter of fact, Tom Grossi, during his NFL fans reaction to Week 12 video, which I saw earlier today when I was working out for the Patriots fan reaction, he had the hoodie on. Well, he had the hoodie on with the "We're back." But that's also in part because in this game, Kansas City won, which knocked the Colts down to 8-3. And Kansas City moves up on the ranks to 6-5, and they keep their playoff hopes alive. Now, for Kansas City, it's still a long shot. And this season has not been their best season thus far. They're still sitting at 3rd in the AFC West. And when it comes to that AFC playoff picture, which I'll show you guys the playoff picture a little bit later on in the episode, we'll get to that. But so far for the playoff picture, it's not looking pretty for the Kansas City Chiefs right now. The odds are not in their favor, even at 6-5, because they're in a loaded AFC. And in this one, and even in this game, it wasn't a great performance here. They still gave up 4 sacks. Mahomes threw a pick. He didn't have any touchdowns. It was the Kareem Hunt show that led the way here with 104 rushing yards and a touchdown. And even Mahomes made a few plays as well. He scrambled 4 times, got 30 yards on the scrambles, including a long 13 yards. And the only real reliable option was Rashee Rice, who had 8 receptions, 141 yards, and he played a key role in that offense. And then for Kansas City, their defense did play a huge role in this one. They actually, and give them credit where credit's due, they held Jonathan Taylor to under 60 total rushing yards. Jonathan Taylor only had 58 yards in this one. So credit to Kansas City's defense for minimizing Jonathan Taylor's efficiency to only 58 yards and averaging 3.6 yards per attempt. So I'm going to give Kansas City's defense credit there. At the same time, I can also look at the Colts play calling, having Daniel Jones pass 31 times. Well, don't get me wrong. Daniel Jones did not have a bad game at all. He still was 19 for 31, 2 touchdowns, no picks. So I'm not saying Daniel Jones had a bad game at all, but I mean, yes, he had the 2 touchdowns, but he didn't have a big enough game to help break the game open for this offense. The Indianapolis Colts are at their best when Jonathan Taylor's getting carries. When they're giving Jonathan Taylor 20 plus carries a game, that's usually when he gets close to 90 or over 100 yards. And in this game, we didn't see that from him. So the Colts probably should have maybe given Jonathan Taylor a few more runs, and that could have made a difference. Again, Daniel Jones did not have a bad game at all. He didn't have any turnovers. He still had 2 touchdowns. So I'm not saying that Daniel Jones was horrible, but usually when Jonathan Taylor is the main source of the offense and he's the focal point of the Colts offense, that's when they're at their best and they win games. And we didn't see that here in this one. So I'm going to have to say that. So I do think they could have done that a little more, but at the same time, I got to give Kansas City credit. Like I said, Jonathan Taylor is my MVP. And what did they do? They ultimately shut Jonathan Taylor down to under 60 rushing yards. So I'm giving this Kansas City defense credit. And they stopped them to 5 for 11 on 3rd down too. So, folks, I'm going to give Kansas City credit in this one as well. But Kansas City gets a much-needed win, saves their season, and what ended up being a good game. So credit to the Kansas City Chiefs on getting a much-needed, I emphasize again, a much-needed win. But now moving right along, we're going to keep it going with the 1 o'clock games. We're going to switch conferences. Well, we're going to switch the conferences now from an NFC West team to an AFC West team to the NFC West. You had the Seattle Seahawks defeat the Tennessee Titans by a score of 30-24. Now, the score box doesn't tell the final score doesn't tell the full story. It looks like a much more competitive game, but if those of you that actually followed along with it during either whether you're watching the Giants and Lions, Steelers, Bears, Packers, Vikings, whichever 1 o'clock game you may have been watching, you guys saw earlier in the game, it was a blowout, and Seattle was in cruise control throughout most of the game. Now, the second half, to the Titans' credit, they scored 21 in the second half, and that played a role in making it closer. Particularly, the Titans had 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. They had a 90-yard punt return from Chimere Dike, who made this one of the special team, arguably the special teams play of the week. And that played a key role in this one. Now, Sam Darnold, I said last week this would be the perfect rebound game on Pick'ems with Agent Warrior last week, that this would be the perfect rebound game for Sam Darnold to put the debacle, the disastrous game against the Rams behind him, and he did just that. Had 2 touchdowns, no pick, complete turnaround. Kenneth Walker also had himself a solid game, 11 carries, 71 yards. Zach Charbonnet had 6 carries for 35 yards. And Jackson Smith had 8 receptions, 167, 2 touchdowns, continuing to be the lead weapon in the offense. So offensively, the Seattle Seahawks had themselves a perfect rebound performance against the Tennessee Titans. But their defense kind of got a little overzealous, and they let Cam Ward have a pretty solid day for 256 and a touchdown. But, hey, it's only one game. To be fair, the Seattle Seahawks are still one of the top defenses in the NFL. Even last week against the Rams in that loss, they held them to only 19 points. So I'm not giving up on that Seattle defense at all. No. I'm simply saying that, look, the Tennessee Titans had a solid performance, better than expected. Maybe it's one of those things for the Seahawks. You get a little bit overzealous. You see the Titans are in the schedule. You think this is an easy game. It happens usually. You play a little bit underprepared, and the team does better than expected. But at the end of the day, the Seahawks still got to win, and they can put the loss from the Rams behind them. So now for the Seahawks, you get the win here. You get Darnold's confidence back going. You put that behind you. Now you got the Vikings on November 30th. It's the Sam Darnold revenge game from last year. And the Seattle Seahawks defense, that should be a good matchup against J.J. McCarthy, because J.J. McCarthy looks extremely rust green, and he still has a lot of work to do because he's playing ugly football like he did against the Green Bay Packers, with the Packers ultimately defeating the Vikings 23-6. And J.J. McCarthy, yikes. I know this is pretty much his glorified rookie season because he missed all of last year. But still, man, 2 interceptions and a fumble lost. Man, J.J. McCarthy's got a lot of work to do, folks. A lot of work to do to start turning the ship around. Because so far, I'm not seeing it from J.J. McCarthy. I'm not. When I look at what I see with JJ, I'm just like, he's got a lot of work to do. He's really raw. He's making careless mistakes. Currently for the season, throughout his starts, he's at 6 TDs, 10 INTs. And the Green Bay Packers, again, their defense has an excellent performance. And for them, they get a much-needed win going into the Thanksgiving showdown versus the Lions in Detroit. Now, that's going to be an interesting game, which me and Agent Warrior will talk about that tonight at 9:30 on the Pick'ems. This week, though, it's going to be 9:30 instead of 8 o'clock. But going next week, we'll be right back to our regularly scheduled 8 o'clock on Tuesday time. But for this 1 week, we're bumping it ahead. But, man, so for the Packers, you get a much-needed win going against the Detroit Lions team you already beat, who, mind you, the Detroit Lions themselves had themselves a rebound win. So that sets up the stages for that Packers game. But in this one, too, we got to point out, to be fair, the Packers, even despite missing Josh Jacobs, they didn't miss a beat running. Emmanuel Wilson had 107 yards on 28 carries. So that does raise the question, though, is Jordan Love truly the next face of the franchise? I don't know, because what I'm seeing so far, we seems like the last couple of years, you think about it. Usually last year, it was mostly the Josh Jacobs show on offense for the Packers. We noticed that Josh Jacobs played the key role in the Packers going from a 9-win team to an 11-win team. And then you see this year, again, it's mostly the defense, Micah Parsons addition, making this defense a elite defense, and the Josh Jacobs, or in this case, Emmanuel Wilson show. So I don't really see Jordan Love as that next face of the Packers. Because so far, what I've seen, it's the running backs and the defense show that runs in Green Bay. But that's something, obviously, they got to work on. Now, and that's something that they're going to have to be ready for against the Detroit Lions. Now, we know their defense can handle business against the Lions. They did that week 1, but can they do it again? And the Lions, they're fresh off a win against the New York Giants at home, but I don't know. The circumstances behind the win were a bit shady. A little bit shady, honestly, because they played a much more competitive game than you expect. But to be fair in this one, look, Jameis Winston actually had himself a good game. He threw 2 touchdowns. He even caught a touchdown on a trick play. And that was a fun little play to watch, just as a football fan. Even with the division rival team scoring, it was like, you know what? That was actually a nice trick play. I give him that. So Jameis Winston did have himself a pretty good game. But ultimately, the Detroit Lions still found a way to win. But let's face it, people are going to say, oh, the Lions look rusty against the Giants. It was a competitive game against the Giants. Oh, just hush it, all right? How many times throughout the NFL have we seen a top team win a competitive game against a team that's supposed to be less than them? How many times have we seen it, games that were much more competitive than they theoretically had any business being? Come on, we've seen this drill 1, 2, 3, 4, Well, I lost count how many times. Every week it seems like in a football season, we see those games that end up being more competitive than you expect, even though the team you expect to win wins. And that's what happened with the Lions and Giants. It went to overtime. It was a competitive game, and the Lions won. But we got to remember something. The New York Giants are known for blowing fourth quarter leads, and that's what happened here. It kind of similar again. It went to overtime, and then the Lions took away the game in overtime. Jamar Gibbs had a phenomenal run, and he forced missed tap. He had a great game too with 15 carries. And then he had total 219 rushing yards, and he missed, of course, 5 missed tackles the whole game, including the overtime game winner as well. So this was a phenomenal. So Jamar Gibbs had himself an absolutely phenomenal game against the New York Giants. That's the biggest difference there between the Eagles defense and the New York Giants is the Philadelphia Eagles defense found a way to stop Gibbs. The Giants didn't have an answer for him, and he played a pivotal role in their victory over the Giants. So credit to Jamar Gibbs having himself a phenomenal day. You also got to remember, though, Jared Goff had 2 touchdowns, too. So let's not forget about Jared Goff. Amon St. Brown had one, and including Jamar Gibbs had, along with 219 rushing, or they had 45 yards receiving, including a touchdown as well. So all around, great performance by Jamar Gibbs. I won't be surprised if he wins NFC Offensive Player of the Week for Week 12. Because he put together a great case for that. And then moving right along, we're going to close this out, the NFC North Circle out, by talking about the Chicago Bears. Chicago Bears defeating their division rival, defeating the Pittsburgh Steelers of the AFC North, and 31-28 at home. And what ended up being the most exciting game of 1 o'clock. I'm actually glad I picked this. Well, actually, both games, because where I'm at, we had CBS had Bears Steelers, and Fox had the Giants and Lions. So either way, both ended up getting 2 good games from both of them. But particularly in this case, the Bears Steelers ended up being a fun game, where the Chicago Bears now look like more of a legit threat for finding a way to continue winning. Now they've won 7 of their last 8 under Ben Johnson. Caleb Williams, well, he didn't look perfect in this game. He still had 3 passing touchdowns, including 2 to DJ Moore, and that ended up being good enough to get the win, including Kyle Monaghy had 12 carries, 48 yards, and a touchdown. And then you had the Chicago Bears offense did great, pretty good in this game. Caleb Williams, okay, you say maybe he's not the best quarterback in the league, but he certainly made improvements with Ben Johnson as the head coach. You certainly see the play calling's been adjusted, and they find ways to score points and make plays. And in this one, they scored 31 against the Pittsburgh Steelers in this one. And, DJ, it looks like Caleb's found more chemistry with his receivers, and having a more competent mind at head coach has certainly made a difference, with Caleb Williams going from year 1 being stuck last year with Eberflus to this year having Ben Johnson. He clearly makes a difference going from a defensive-minded head coach to an offensive-minded head coach. And that's a lesson you can learn from the Chicago Bears. You need that offensive-minded head coach. You need that guy who knows offense, who's offensive-minded, who knows how to work with a quarterback. And that's what you got here with Ben Johnson. You see the improved decision-making by Caleb Williams, and it comes in handy in this one. They end up winning 31-28. Now, their weak point, though, is their linebackers. Even Tom Grossi joked in the NFL fan reaction from the Bears fan standpoint, our linebackers never heard of them. But on the serious note, though, the biggest weak point was the Bears' run defense, as you had Kenneth Gainwell on 10 carries at 92 yards, Jaylen Warren at 18 for 68. And you saw that there, and it was obvious. Yeah. And then Kenneth Gainwell had also 6 receptions for 30 yards as well. So you could see the Chicago Bears struggled against the run game, and that was their Achilles heel in this one. But fortunately, they had the privilege of going against Mason Rudolph here. They got to Mason Rudolph twice, forced him to throw a pick, which ended up being enough to help the Bears get the win. But the Bears move on to 8-3. Now they get the Philadelphia Eagles, and that's going to be interesting. But now we're moving right along. We go from the NFC North. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the AFC North. Because now with the Steelers taking the loss, falling to 6-5, that opened the door with the Baltimore Ravens victory over the New York Jets, 23-10. Now they're at 6-5. The Ravens have gone on a nice winning streak now with Lamar Jackson back. And now they come back Thanksgiving night. They host the Cincinnati Bengals, who are bringing Joe Burrow back. That's going to make that game all the more interesting. But the Baltimore Ravens now all of a sudden are on a 5-game winning streak, and they're tied with first at 6-5 with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, yes, I know people are going to point to, well, they've had an easy schedule. They've had to play teams like the Jets, and they played teams like the Dolphins and teams like the Browns and the Texans, who are mediocre. Yes, that is true. They have played a lot. They have played a favorable schedule, but at the end of the day, going from 1-5 to winning 5 straight at 6-5 is never easy, no matter who it is. So don't make no mistake. Don't think, oh, yeah, well, anybody can do that. Not quite. Trust me, a team with lesser talent wouldn't have been able to go on this 5-game winning streak. They could have been at best maybe 4-6 at this point, or 4-7 instead of 6-5. They would have been 4-7. A team with less maybe been 4-7 or 3-8. So don't say that so even easy schedule or not, the Baltimore Ravens are making an incredible run with 5 straight wins, regardless of the quality of the opponent quality. Because that's never an easy feat to go with. And now you see Lamar Jackson healthy. We know what he can be. Former 2-time MVP. And in this game, the Jets actually did look okay on offense. Like they tried. Tyrod Taylor tried, but ultimately you're talking about a guy who is a veteran who's dealt with a ton of injuries and was never a true starter. Even during that brief stint with the Bills where he helped lead them to the playoffs in 2017, nearly a decade ago after that long playoff drought, Tyrod Taylor was never truly thought of as the guy. And even in this case, the Ravens offense, I don't know. It looked like to me like they were more focused on Thursday night. Like it looked like they were thinking more about Thanksgiving and playing the Cincinnati Bengals than it did the New York Jets. Because while they scored over 20 points in one, Lamar only had 153 yards, no touchdowns. And Derrick Henry only had 64 yards and 2 touchdowns, but they were mostly short yardage runs against a big New York Jets defense who shipped away their best player. To me, I feel like the Baltimore Ravens were kind of looking this as the filler game before the Cincinnati Bengals. They're like, okay, we got the New York Jets. We're not really worried about them. We should take care of business and be above 500. We're saving our best for Thursday against the Bengals on Thanksgiving in front of our home crowd. And that's pretty much what happened here. That was pretty much the Baltimore Ravens mindset. But ultimately, it paid up. But the Ravens did enough to win. Now they got a big game against the Bengals. But either way, a win's a win, and they're above 500 for the first time this season. So, shout out to the Baltimore Ravens, man. Now, I still don't think Harbaugh's the guy that's going to lead him to a Super Bowl in the long haul, but that's another discussion for another time. Moving right along, now we're going to stick with the theme of the AFC North versus the AFC East because we had 2 showdowns between teams in those respective divisions. The second being the New England Patriots versus the Cincinnati Bengals. In this one, the Patriots got the win 26-20. I feel like, again, we kind of saw a similar theme with the Patriots. It's kind of like they thought of this as an easy game. It looks like they're probably looking forward to something else on their schedule. Because, while the Patriots have the Giants on Monday night, that should be easy. They're probably looking more forward to the December 14th matchup following their bye against the Buffalo Bills, the rematch this time at home. But in this case, the Patriots did what they needed to do. It was a close game, but a win's a win. Now, I know you're kind of wondering about the offense. 26-20 against an all-time worst defense? That doesn't look great, but hey, oftentimes we've seen it before. Like I said earlier about the Giants and Lions, usually these games where one team's far better than the other on paper usually end up being closer than expected. And the reason why, when you're the team that's the clear-cut favorite, usually you're not thinking about the bad teams. You're usually looking at it as filler for the bigger games. And when you're the struggling team like the Cincinnati Bengals in this case, you're playing for pride. You're playing to keep your job. There's more hunger. The Bengals went into this one more hungry than the Patriots, I feel, because they really had their pride to play for. A lot of these guys are just fighting to keep their jobs. A lot of the coaches, a lot of the players, they just want job security for next season. So they're playing hungry. The Patriots, they've been motivated throughout the season, but this Bengals game isn't the game they're looking forward to the most. And that kind of played a role in a closer outcome. But at the end of the day, ultimately, the Patriots got a win. It was enough. Hunter Henry was the lead receiver, 7 receptions, 115 yards, a touchdown. Drake May didn't have his best game, but it is what it is. And Chase Brown showed a spark for the Bengals in this one. 19 carries, 107 yards. Pretty solid performance by Chase Brown, who's actually come onto his own lately in the last couple games for the. He's had, in the past 5 games, for those 5 games, he's had 70 or more rushing yards. So Chase Brown's come onto his own a little bit lately and done pretty solid for the Bengals. So they at least have some hope at running back. But defense and obviously the team as a whole is a big concern for the future. I'm just going to show you Chase Brown's stats real quick. You see here 107, 99. 37 against the Bears, but then against the Jets, over 70, over 100 against the Steelers. So Chase Brown for the Cincinnati Bengals has been putting together a nice little streak. At least gives them something at running back to work with. But ultimately, the Bengals as a team have a long way to go. And this game just kind of felt like filler for both teams, specifically for the Bengals. You're waiting to bring Joe Burrow back on Thanksgiving against the Ravens. We'll see how that goes. We'll talk about that more tonight on Pick'ems with myself and Agent Warrior. But in the meantime, before we wrap up the AFC North, going to take a quick break. Then when I come back for the quick break, we'll talk about Shedeur Sanders' first start in the NFL. Let you know what I think about the good and the bad from Shedeur. So we'll take a quick break, put some copyright-free music in the background, come right back. Your boy's going to talk about Shedeur Sanders' debut. So stay tuned. All right. I am back. We're back, folks, from a quick break. Now it is time for us to get into the 4 o'clock games. And as promised, before we went on the quick break, I will start this thing out by talking about the Cleveland Browns versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Specifically, we're going to talk about the debut of Mr. Shedeur Sanders and how he held it down in that week 1, in this first start as an NFL quarterback in this week 12 matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders. For Shedeur Sanders, you could tell, well, for starters, you could see the swagger was there. He went out there and just had it. He went out there, really went out there. Now, he didn't have the greatest game in the world, but considering this was his first start, and yes, this was against an abysmal Las Vegas Raiders team, but Shedeur Sanders showed some flashes in this game. And ultimately, you compared Shedeur Sanders, even off a small sample size, to Dillon Gabriel, which, to be fair, both QBs had a small sample size, but obviously, Shedeur, you only got this one full start to go off of. You could see from this start alone that Shedeur Sanders is more poised in the situation. He has better playmaking abilities. Even at times, you could see Shedeur versus Dillon Gabriel. Shedeur even improv'd a few times with the play calling he received, whereas Dillon Gabriel, when he started, he would just stick with the standard, run whatever play you're given. You never saw the ability to improvise or make plays on the fly. And that's ultimately why Shedeur Sanders was a higher prospect going into the draft than Dillon Gabriel. And with this one start, even just one start, and yes, it's against the Raiders, you clearly saw, now you see why Shedeur Sanders was a higher prospect than Dillon Gabriel. And at this point, they've named Shedeur the starter for the 49ers game next week. I say, why not? Your season's already a lost cause for the Browns anyway. And at least if you put Shedeur against I like Shedeur. I feel like you got the greater upside. Now, does that mean he's going to be the long-term answer? It's way too early to tell. We don't know yet. Well, we got Greg John stopping by in the chat. Thanks for stopping by. Well, he's one of my big fans of the three-point blitz, who's been one of my longest supporters alongside Mitch Koski, David Podden, Arku. So shout out to my three-point blitz fan club for always stopping by and supporting me. And you're just in time, Greg, if you want to leave your thoughts on Shedeur, you're more than welcome to in the chat. And when it comes to Shedeur, like I said, it's not the greatest game in the world, but then again, it's only his first start of his rookie season. And any rookie quarterback, you're going to see some struggles early on. You got to make that big adjustment from the NFL to the NFL. You go from college to the NFL. The biggest adjustment being when you're in college, you're usually between the 18 to 22 age range playing against other players that fit into that same age range. When you go to the NFL, you go from playing against mostly young men your age to going against full-grown men in the NFL. Some people closer to your age range, some veterans, some guys in the late 30s, maybe early 40s. You go from playing against a bunch of college kids your age to now going against sometimes elite players at their position, the best player currently at their position, middle of the pack veterans who have more experience than you, or scrubs. Like, you get that varying levels of competition at the NFL. That's the biggest thing about the adjustment. You're not going against kids your age. You're not relying on being more talented and more knowledgeable than this other 20-year-old. You're going against 30-year-old veterans who have made the Pro Bowl before, or maybe the best at their position currently. So for sure, yeah, it's going to take some time. You got to adjust from what you were used to at Colorado, playing with your dad, to now you got Kevin Stefanski. You got a whole different team around you. And in this game, look, this was a perfect start for Shedeur going against the Raiders, because you got a team, a struggling team. It's a perfect game to put a young quarterback like Shedeur in. Let him go out there. Let him have some shine. He got 209 yards and a touchdown in this one. 87.3 passer rating. Solid for a debut. And now it's perfect because you give the man some time, get his confidence going, get his feet wet a little bit in a favorable situation, which is always good for a rookie quarterback. Because usually you want to start these rookie quarterbacks in those favorable situations. Like, you don't want to do what the 49ers did with Alex Smith in 2005, where they started him mid-October against the Indianapolis Colts, who were undefeated at the time and had one of the best defenses. That was a terrible move by the Niners. Or you didn't want to start Shedeur against the Niners in this case. Let him get that game against the Raiders. But now, with that being said, though, they do play the Niners next week. It'll be interesting with Shedeur to see. We'll have to see how he does. He's going to get tested against that Niners team next week. Now, for him, he does have the privilege of playing against a shorthanded Niners defense, so there are weak points he could take advantage of. But to be fair, the San Francisco 49ers defense did pretty solid yesterday, which we'll talk about that in a minute. But for Shedeur, you got to look around. He's got a halfway decent Browns team offense around. I mean, the team is a dumpster fire, but he at least has the potential. He has some of the talent around him. You still got Jerry Jeudy's there, who is still a solid guy option. You got Quinshawn Jukons, Jerome Ford. You got Cedric Tillman, David Nukua, tight end. You got some pieces there. You got an okay team around them, at least some receivers for sure to get acquainted with. Now, if Shedeur does better than Dylan Gabriel, he at least shows some flashes. You say, okay, he had a decent rookie season for a rookie. You still have 2 first-round picks. You invest in those first-round picks. Maybe get another offensive lineman or a wide receiver to help build that offense around Shedeur further next year. If Shedeur just completely flames out and plays like J.J. McCarthy and you're not sure who the future is, okay, you got a whole offseason to evaluate. Maybe they realize the guy isn't there. But we still got to give Shedeur Thanksgiving weekend in December to see what he can do. I think they should stick with him even when Gabriel comes back, because remember, between the two quarterbacks, say what you want about Shedeur Sanders, whether you like the guy or not. He was the bigger prospect entering the draft. He was higher on people's draft boards than Dylan Gabriel. So stick with the prospect who you feel has the most promise for the future and see what you got. And in this case, that would be Shedeur Sanders. Even though I get as an Eagles fan, it's not necessarily the cool thing to do to praise Deion Sanders' kid. But in this case, not necessarily praising him, but he has the more potential of the two. It's just a matter of time now to put it together. So good first start. I don't want to ramble on about that too long. But speaking of the Eagles, I did talk about it yesterday. I'm just going to be quick on it here. Let's talk about it. So the Philadelphia Eagles jump off to a blazing hot start against the Dallas Cowboys, 21-0. Oh, wait, before we move on real quickly, I got to give credit where credit's due real quickly. Thank you, Gregor. Credit to Myles Garrett. He's had a phenomenal season. In this case, he broke the record for most sacks in a season by a Cleveland Brown player. Myles Garrett is having himself an absolutely phenomenal season this year. Unfortunately, he's stuck in a bad team situation, but Myles Garrett's easily a top defensive lineman, and he's going to be the guy that a lot of these draft prospects entering the 2026 draft on the defensive side of the ball get compared to. So I'm going to give Myles Garrett credit. Phenomenal season thus far. He's out on a mission statement. Now, there have been the rumors he wants to get traded, but maybe that's what it is here. Maybe that's why Myles Garrett's gone out, had an 18-sack season, and he's just wrecking havoc. Had 2 forced fumbles as well in this one. He's had 3 forced fumbles on the season total, as well as 18 sacks. That could be why Myles Garrett's going out just having himself a phenomenal season. He's on the trade market. He probably wants to, good chance he wants to increase his value on the market. But we'll ultimately see about whether that's the case or not. But he's having a phenomenal season. If you're the Cleveland Browns, you want to retain Myles Garrett, you better pay him and use that draft to build up the offense. So pretty much that's the last thing to say about the Browns. Pay Myles Garrett so a contract he can't turn down, or give him an extension he can't turn down. Use the draft, build the offense up. Raiders need to move on from Geno, and that would certainly help. But the Raiders let's face it, the Raiders need a lot more than that. They need a new offensive line. They need, oh my God, they need a quarterback they can draft. They need a new coach, new owner. The Raiders really just need new everything. That would be a long discussion to have. But they definitely need everything. They definitely need a quarterback, because the Raiders relying on these veterans hasn't been working. Now, let's get this over with. I talked about it briefly yesterday. Let's make this a Cliff Notes recap of my Eagles-Cowboys recap. So the Eagles started off hot, up 21-0, but the Cowboys made second-half adjustments on both sides of the ball, scored 24 unanswered points, won the game on a Brandon Aubrey field goal. Now, the Eagles in this one, they can blame themselves first and foremost. 2 lost fumbles. One of them, the first of those 2 lost fumbles back-to-back late in the game, came on a drive. The Eagles moved in Cowboys territory with a shot to retake the lead that could have potentially changed the outcome of that game, and we'd be having an entirely different conversation. But Saquon fumbled. The Eagles defense got a stop, but then they fumbled the kick return. They got a 4th and goal stop, and the Eagles had 2 fourth down stops. So the Eagles defense did pretty solid despite struggling against Lamb and Pickens. But when your offense is such a one-dimensional offense, we got Kevin Patullo forcing Hurts to be a pocket passer when that's not who he is as a quarterback. When you got a predictable offense where you're using the same player personnel of Hurts, Saquon, AJ Smitty, Goddard, and that's pretty much it. They're very predictable offense. And even on that sack, that 3rd and 2, they could have done a quarterback draw, maybe gotten 2 yards. But instead what happens is Jalen Hurts as soon as the play starts, he zones in on his first option with his AJ, completely misses the fact that he's getting pressured and ends up getting a drop for loss. Eagles punt it back to the Cowboys. They don't see the ball again. So Jalen Hurts needs to focus on being able to read the entire field and not just one player. Because apparently I've heard he had Devontae open on that play and he missed him. And then as well, you got to stop using the same player personnel for the Eagles too. Try to get Jahan Dotson a little bit more involved in the game. Try to get Tank Bigsby and Will Shipley a little bit more involved in the ground game. Rotate your player personnel a little bit so you're not as predictable on offense. And for the Cowboys, hey, I give them credit. They did what they needed to. They made the second half adjustments necessary. Their defense forced a turnover. They got a big sack on third down that helped set up their game-winning field goal. Lamb and Pickens did a good enough job. Dak had 3 total touchdowns on the day, including a rush. And I give the Cowboys credit. They did what they needed to do. They made adjustments, and they got the win. They're at 5-5-1, and still a long shot, but they're not out just yet. So I got to give the Cowboys credit as well. So now that's the Cliff Notes version of yesterday. Moving right along now, we're going to talk about Jaguars and Cardinals. Now, I mean, me personally, the Jaguars won, but this was the one game of the week where the winning team also lost because the Jaguars did not have any convincing performance in this one, particularly Trevor Lawrence. He had 3 touchdowns, but he also had 3 interceptions too. And that played a key role in keeping this game competitive as well. And then you had Travis Etienne had himself a solid, good, not a great game. For the Jaguars, for a team that's supposed to be a contender to make the playoffs against a 3-win team like the Cardinals, this was not a convincing performance. And there's a good chance in this one. And remember, this came with Marvin Harrison Jr. being out. If the Cardinals would have had Marvin Harrison Jr., that could have completely changed the look of their offense. He could have made a few key plays that broke the game open. You could have been talking about a Cardinals victory over the Jaguars. So you're talking possibly the Jaguars were one player away from the Cardinals' perspective from possibly losing this game and the Cardinals moving to 4 wins on the season. And Jagrega says Jaguars are playing pretty good overall. So, the Jaguars, to their credit, Liam Cohen is a better option than Doug Peterson. And they certainly gotten the better out of this team than they did, because now they're sitting at 7 wins, potentially in the mix for a wild card spot. That remains to be determined. We still got to wait and see. Hold on a sec. Actually, I stand corrected. It was a 3-point win for the Jaguars, not a 7-point. But with that being said, I stand what I say about if Marvin Harrison Jr. played, that could have been the difference. But either way, he's done better with what he's had, but Trevor Lawrence, I'm still not sold on him as a franchise quarterback. I still feel Trevor Lawrence is overrated. And then, Jacoby Myers scored. He gets his revenge. He gets his 1 week to shine. And, he's on a better team now, so maybe he gets a shot to start in a playoff game, depending on how the Jaguars do down this closing stretch. But at 7-4, man. At 7-4, they're in solid position, but we got to wait and see how they close it out. So I will give the Jaguars credit, but I still not sold on Trevor Lawrence as the guy. I just still think he's got some work to do. But congrats to the Jaguars. And Liam Cohen, though, has done a pretty good job turning this team around. Can't deny that. Josh Allen, the other Josh Allen, who unfortunately, I'll tell you this, if Josh Allen wasn't given the stigma of playing in the same era as a star quarterback with the same name, people would be talking about him more. He's clearly one of the best pieces on that Jaguars defense. And if it weren't for, like I said, if he had a different name, I think Josh Hines Allen, people would talk about him a little bit more. He did make the 2024 Pro Bowl. And now he's had 2 Pro Bowl nods, and he's been a pretty solid player thus far. So unfortunately, though, he's stuck with that stigma. And in 9 games this season, he's had, 23 tackles, 5 for a loss, 2 sacks. He had a pass deflection. He's a pretty solid player when he's on the field, but all around, though, credit Liam Cohen. Jaguars are doing better. Now he's got to see how they close out. But moving right along, we got the Falcons and Saints. For the Falcons, this is one of those situations where even in victory, they kind of got defeated. Now, hear me out. Michael Penix Jr., their starting quarterback, is out for the season. A guy who has a long list of injury history going back to his college days. Because if you Google Michael Penix injury history, he's had a long list of injuries, which makes you wonder, how is he even in the NFL at this point? You got to wonder, how long is he going to hold up? And matter of fact, this goes all the way back to college. I'll show you guys real quickly. Before we get into this game, Michael Penix Jr., significant injury history. 2 ACL tears in his right knee in college. Right shoulder injury in 2019. Left shoulder 2021. So, look, he's been in college. He was part of the reason it took so long for him to finally reach the NFL draft is due to injuries. And now, torn left ACL and knee bone bruise, season-ending injury. So the Falcons ultimately box themselves in a bad situation here. Because now you're stuck with a guy in Michael Penix who you don't know how much longer he's going to hold up, especially with that injury history. And remember, it seemed like an insane reach at the time. A lot of people were calling them losers because of that injury history with Penix, and you're thinking, are you sure you can rely on him to stay healthy at the NFL level? And now they're stuck without Penix for the season. They have to rely on Kirk Cousins, who's 37 going on 38. Saints, Raiders, Jets are going for the number 1 pick. Yep, the tank race. So now for the Falcons, you won, but you had to rely on veteran Kirk Cousins, who, how much longer is he going to have left to play better just by default of him being more experienced than Penix and more durable to beat the Saints, who, as Greg pointed out, are in the Tank Bowl championship race right now. That's not really much of a win for the Falcons. Yeah, it's a win for this game to get you to 4 wins, but what about the long term? Raises a lot more questions and red flags about this Atlanta Falcons future than it does actually making you feel confident about this team's future, because they have Drake London, they have Bijan Robinson, you had an awesome receiver, an excellent running back, and you're wasting their peak without a real quarterback to go to. You got Kyle Pitts, who isn't great, but he's still a solid tight end. And you're wasting away a potential great offense by not having a real long-term quarterback. Now, for the Saints, Kellen Moore, why'd you have to take that head coaching job? You should have stayed as the Eagles offensive coordinator. And the Saints, let's face it, they're abysmal. Tyler Show doesn't look like the long-term answer to me. He looks like a decent backup at best, is his ceiling to me. You don't have much to work with. If you're the Saints, you need to just take one of these top 5 picks and just hit the reset button as a franchise. So enough about that game. We got 2 more games to talk about. Let's start with the Sunday night game. The Los Angeles Rams, how about that? A 34-7 shellacking of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This worked out perfectly for the Rams because with the Eagles losing to the Cowboys, Rams are now 9-2. They're in first place in the NFC, and they keep strong hold in the conference. So credit where credit's due to the Los Angeles Rams for taking care of business. I mean, look, I said I picked the Rams to win. They're the better all-around team than the Bucs, but I did not expect them to destroy the Buccaneers. I mean, you had nothing going for them. You had Baker Mayfield left the game. Teddy Bridgewater had to come in. He couldn't do anything to help. He had 2 sacks. Stafford threw 3 touchdowns in this one. He hit Devontae Adams twice. He hit Colby Parkinson. He hit Puka Nacua for 97 yards. And he didn't get the end zone, but he hit him for 97 yards. He was still the lead receiver yard-wise. They got 2 picks on Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield looked like, oh no, and he suffered a shoulder injury. Suppose his MRI next. So now we got to see what happens. And remember, Baker Mayfield, remember the last time he had a shoulder injury in Cleveland in 2021? The Browns started off the season, looked kind of hot, but then Baker tried to play through the injury and they fell off. What's going to happen now with the Bucs? And that's the key question. I'll get to that in a second, Greg. First, I'm going to say, John, I'll get to you in a second, but I'm just going to say this about the Bucs. It's looking like they could be the team to collapse for the season. They were 6-2. They've dropped 3 straight. Baker's got an injury to his non-throwing shoulder, but we've seen this before, and it didn't work out well last time this happened to Baker. The Bucs might just be the team that ends up collapsing after a hot start and completely missing out. But fortunately for the Rams, they look like the class of the NFC right now. I'd say they're the class of the NFC this year going into the playoffs. They're the team to beat because unlike the Philadelphia Eagles, they look awesome on both sides of the ball. Their defense is making plays. They've got some they're not the best defense in the world, but they got some solid pieces. Jared Verse has been pretty solid. And they've allowed only 16.3 points per game. And they've only allowed total yards, only 311 on average, which is 9th in the NFL. They've done pretty solid in this one. Yet Cam Curl leads the way with tackles in this one. Byron Young has 9 sacks. So you got a pretty solid unit there with guys like Cam Curl, Nate Landman, who got an extension earlier this week, Byron Young, Jared Verse, Kobe Turner. You got a pretty solid unit that's great at team defense, as well as Matthew Stafford having his best statistical season. Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, excellent 1-2 duo. They're great on both sides of the ball. And they got hot at the right time of year now, going into the holiday season. So I got to agree with you, John. The Rams are the team to beat in the NFC because now they built momentum beating 3 teams above 500 in convincing fashion. The 49ers, the Seahawks, and now the Buccaneers. So I'm going to say we're going to keep our eye out on the Rams, see how they can do from here because they're the top team in the NFC. Moving right along, you got the San Francisco 49ers. To me, I know I said this earlier about the Falcons, but if anything, the real team that lost in victory was the 49ers. Because while they won against the Panthers and they keep that momentum going in terms of looking for a wild card spot 8-4, the way they played, look, Christian McCaffrey, nice revenge game here against his former team. 89 yards on 24 carries and a touchdown, 53 yards receiving, had himself above 100 all-purpose yards. But Brock Purdy, he had 3 interceptions in the first half. Granted, he stopped the mistakes in the second half, but we got to be fair, too. The Panthers lost to several defensive players throughout the game. They had numerous guys leaving the game in the second half due to injury, including their top defensive player, the top player in the secondary, J.C. Horn, left too. So that really put their defense in a spot where they were handicapped most of the second half, and that certainly made Brock Purdy's day a lot easier because you had J.C. Horn, and Corey Thornton both left the game and didn't return. And notice it was after that Brock Purdy's mistakes were limited, was able to keep the turnovers down after throwing 3 in the first half. So congrats to the 49ers. Christian McCaffrey had himself a nice revenge game against his former team, but I was not impressed with Brock Purdy's performance in this one against the Panthers defense, throwing 3 picks. With that being said, the Niners are still 8-4. They're still in wild card contention, so I won't take anything away from them. And we'll leave it at that. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Quickly talk about the winners and losers from Week 12 of the NFL. Give you my projected winners and losers. I'm going to make this the quick version. So we're going more with a Thanksgiving themed color here is what I'm trying to do. So again, happy Thanksgiving to everyone out there if you're celebrating it. Don't catch you again. Now, real quick, Week 12 winners. The main three winners for me in this one are the Kansas City Chiefs. They're not the greatest performance against the Colts, but they found a way to beat a top AFC team and help keep their season alive in a tight AFC West and a tight AFC wildcard picture, which I'll show you guys in a second. Second winner, I go the Chicago Bears. In a game against an always tough Pittsburgh Steelers team, they found a way to win, move to 8-3, and stay in first place in the NFC North, with both the Packers and Lions creeping up in the division race. So that's my second winner of the week. The last one I just talked about, the Los Angeles Rams, dismantling the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, defeating their third straight above 500 team in the NFC, building momentum headed into the holiday season. I'm definitely watching the Thanksgiving games. I'll catch some of the Eagles game as well, probably the second half of that one. So I will be catching football on Thanksgiving and Black Friday. Now, real quick, the Week 12 biggest losers for me, the Philadelphia Eagles blowing a 21-point lead in a game they should have been able to easily win, but they found a way to blow it and fall short. Secondly, the Buffalo Bills falling apart in a game they were favored, giving up 8 sacks. Josh Allen having an abysmal performance. So I'm going to have to go with them as losers. And then the last loser of the week, I'm going to go Minnesota Vikings. I know it's not easy with a young and experienced quarterback, but when you see J.J. McCarthy performing poorly with Kevin O'Connell, who's supposed to be this quarterback guru, that's not a good sign going forward. And you're stuck in last place in a loaded division, which is going to also spell concerns for their future as well. Because you know that those three teams, the Packers, Lions, and Bears are going to be top teams going forward. But moving right along, we're going to close this thing out. We're going to talk about a little bit about the NBA a little bit. So let's talk, because our coup yesterday stopped by in the chat for the Eagles recap, and he made a comment about his OKC Thunder waste off their hot start. Now the question is, are the Oklahoma City Thunder the best team in the NBA currently? I'll say, even though it's only 5 weeks in the NBA season, yes. And the reason I'm making this uncharacteristic assessment and automatic in crowning a team the top team 5 weeks in the basketball season, because the OKC Thunder are the defending champs. They were first place last year in the conference, had the number 1 seed, went on to the finals, won the finals, and now they're coming back this year off to a great start. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who had a double MVP season last year, regular season and finals, continuing right where he left off. Now, here come the OKC Thunder, fresh off a finals win, starting the season 17-1, including a win over the Memphis Grizzlies and a nice performance by SGA. So, yes, I'll say it. The OKC Thunder are the best team in the NBA based off the fact they're defending champs and they're continuing the season where they left off last year. Now, there are some other really good teams we're going to talk about. John, I think you just ahead of me a little bit. We're talking about the Detroit Pistons. And we got something to talk about here in the East. Now, the Detroit Pistons, to be fair, last year, they did make the playoffs as a 6th seed. They put up a competitive fight against the Knicks, but the Knicks, being more experienced and with Jalen Brunson, had their number, and they fell just short in that series. But now they're coming back after 1 year where they finally got to the playoffs, got that experience in the playoffs. You see, they're coming back. They're leading the Eastern Conference 15-2. Detroit Pistons are in first place. Cade Cunningham's getting close to that 30 mark. He's averaging 27 a game. Even Jaden Ivey's been a good number 2 option for this team. And he's also the leader in rebounds, too. He's 11 rebounds. Cunningham's leading the way with 9 assists. You even got Tobias Harris averaging about 14 points a game. You got Jalen Duren in par. He leads the way with rebounds, not Jaden Ivey. Yeah, Jalen Duren's leading the way. Rebounds, number 2 scorer on average for this team. Even Jaden Ivey's getting around 11 a game. So you got multiple guys that are scoring 10-plus points. Even Isaiah Stewart's averaging 10-plus points a game for defensive rebounds. So this team's finally starting to find their groove. And they have depth on this roster, which is nice. Even you got some guys that only play like 12 minutes a game, like Paul Reed, who's getting about 7 points and getting 4 rebounds for an average of 12 minutes a game. So you even got guys like Paul Reed who are on the bench who are doing solid. Karis LeVert is more of a role player on this team, only getting about 19 minutes, but he's scoring close to 10 points, getting you a rebound and a few assists per game. So that's the thing with the Detroit Pistons team. They built a team around their star player. Something the Sixers should take notes on. And then number 2 seed, you got the Toronto Raptors at 13-5. Bit of a shocker here, but to be fair, you got Brandon Ingram, but you also got guys like RJ Barrett, Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickly, Jacob Potel. These guys are they've had a few years in the league. They're starting to find their way a little bit. Brandon Ingram, I think, it's back when I used to be on the Pick and Roll podcast. My compadre from that show, Blazed Radio, would say it best. Sometimes a player it takes a second or third team before they find the right fit. And so far, Brandon Ingram with the Raptors has found his niche. He's averaging plus 20 points a game. He's the lead scorer. I think now it's just that point. Brandon Ingram's found his groove with the Toronto Raptors, and they're off to a hot start. Now, as far as contenders go, I'd say the Pistons are more likely to be contenders out of those 2 teams because they've had that playoff experience. The Raptors, we got to wait and see how they continue as the season goes along. Also, that's noticeable in the NBA, you have Luka Doncic leading the way in points per game, although SGA is leading the way in total points scored. But either way, now you see Nico Harrison is looking more and more idiotic by the day. And real quickly, I'm going to show you guys the NBA standings. Oh, and I will show you the NFL playoff picture too. I almost forgot to show you guys that. I'll show that as I promised before we go off. So before we go off, take a look first at the NBA standings thus far. Eastern Conference, like I said, Pistons, Raptors leading the way. The Heat are number 3. Norman Powell's proved to be a great pickup. Cleveland Cavaliers are at 4th. Knicks at 5th. Hawks at 6th. They've gotten better all around. Porzingis has been a solid addition. We'll see if that continues throughout the season, though. Sixers are at 7th. I mean, per usual story. Although they look a little bit more watchable than last year. Magic sit at 8th. Bulls 9th. Celtics 10th. Then you got the Bucks, not even in playing contention. They got nothing on that roster, to be honest. And the Hornets, Nets, Pacers, no Halliburton, and Wizards. But I think now people are going to start to – I think Tyrese Halliburton's stock went up while he's injured because now you see how bad that team is without him. Moving right along, yeah, like I said, Thunder, best team in the league by default because they're fresh off a championship win. Nuggets 2, Lakers 3, 1 game difference. Rockets 4th, they're contenders so far as we expected. Spurs have taken that next big step. Now you got a solid team. Wemby, Fox, Castle, Vesey, Dylan Harper. You got yourselves depth on that team now. Now you're finally seeing the rebuild pay off now. You got the Phoenix Suns are the surprise team at 6. I don't know how long that's going to last, though, because I still think the Timberwolves with Anthony Edwards, as the season goes along, they'll eventually pass the Suns. I think with the Suns, while they're better than expected, I feel like it's only a temporary thing with the Suns either. And then, of course, Pacers, right? Miles Turner's on the Bucks, who, well, not the same, but then you got the Blazers at 9th, Grizzlies at 10th. Ugh. And then you got the Jazz, Clippers, Kings, Mavs, Pelicans at the bottom there. It was interesting, though. I heard there was a proposal. Now there's a proposal about the Grizzlies trading Ja Morant, maybe to the Hawks. I said about that wasn't a short. Now, if the Hawks don't have to give up too much, that could work out maybe for the Hawks. But for the Grizzlies, getting Trae Young ain't going to help them. And that's only an if scenario, so I'm not really going to get into that. But before we go, I'm just going to share the NFL before we get, I'm not going to really dive too deep into it yet. More so around Christmas time, we'll start to get a little more in depth with the NBA. But so far, this was just a kind of a brief overview of the early portion of the season. So far, who's hot, who's not so far. But before we go, I'm just going to show a brief glimpse of the NFL playoff picture. So we'll show you that real quickly. Hold on a second. And then head on out. So here's what we got. AFC Patriots would have home field today. Broncos the 2 seed, Colts 3, Ravens would win the tiebreaker with the Steelers. Chargers would have the 5th, Jags 6th, Bills 7th. That would be a tiebreaker, but that'll be worked out throughout December. Like I said, Rams would have home field today, and they're just getting stronger as the season goes along. Eagles are still the number 2 seed, Bears number 3. That will change because the two teams play on Black Friday. We'll see who wins and how that goes. Buccaneers are still in 4th by default, but don't be surprised if they have a fall off. Seahawks were at the 5th seed right now. Green Bay 6th, and it would have the 49ers 7th with the Lions looking out of the playoff picture. So that just raises the stakes of that Packers-Lions Thanksgiving game. I think that might actually be my game of Thanksgiving to watch out for. But with that being said, though, y'all, that's all we got for the 3-Point Blitz. Reminder, later tonight at 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. This is just a 1-week thing because I got other obligations for the night at the usual 8 o'clock time. The NFL Pick'ems will be on. Me and Agent Warrior is the co-host, just that this week it'll be 9:30 instead of 8. So it'll be the same routine every game, every pick. To provide some hot takes from a brief overview of Week 12. So you catch us exclusively on the Hardcore Sports Network, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight. I'll catch you then. So with that being said, Mitch, John, everyone that stopped by in the chat, thanks for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed this. So your boy Nicky Steve is going to be signing off. I'll catch you later. If I don't catch you again before Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving. Have a great turkey day. Till next time.